Thanks for joining us. And I'm David Balzen on behalf of CXOinformer.com. My guest today is Joe Loveless, Vice President of Business and Market Development at Affinity Incorporated. Joe is a subject matter expert in using IT to solve complex business problems, and we'll be sharing some insight into the industry today, what's trending, changing, and evolving in that space. Joe, thanks for taking some time to speak with us today. Would you mind just starting off with a little bit about who you are and your background?
Oh, sure, David, and thanks for letting me come in today. This has been great to kind of take the opportunity to be able to talk about what's happening, and more importantly, what businesses are focusing on today, and in particular around improving customer experience and engagement. And I'm excited to be here today. So my background is technical, and I started out, as many people do, starting to assist with IT in a corporate department. Was able to change toner, fix a few PC problems, found a career in IT. But as I went to the provider side about 20 years ago now, I started doing huge implementations and critical network infrastructure. And I was on occasion, put in some peril by things that had been sold because they had been incorrectly marketed, or they'd been marketed with promises that couldn't be met. And I had to dig myself out of quite a few holes. And as such, my career took a turn into getting into pre-sales consulting, into consulting itself, engineering, and then ultimately into sales and marketing. So although I am in business and market development, I consider myself still here on a mission to be able to keep implementations and promises kept relative to what is sold. And the alignment of IT to business process is really where my focus is and remains. Which has been great, because that has certainly been the focus of Affinity for the past 20 years.
When you think about your industry right now, what would you say is trending at the moment?
So it's a broad industry. I mean, the U.S. technology industry alone is 1.6 trillion. It's growing at 6.5%. There's so many different focuses and areas of focus and disciplines. Cybersecurity obviously is a top concern and has been for quite some time. A lot of my recent past and past decade has been around cybersecurity and aligning cybersecurity practices and technologies against business requirements and priorities. That is a continued focus, but where folks have been kind of moving and growing has been towards the customer experience side of it, particularly as we've had to really deal with some tectonic shifts in the way that businesses interact with their customers. Technology helps enable better exchanges, but it's certainly not the panacea. It's not a silver bullet. It's not something that is actually automatic just because it's implemented or it's installed or it's shiny or it's innovative. It really requires an intertwining of business process to technology. And I think businesses certainly have been waking up to that. The markets within artificial intelligence, which is just seeing explosive growth, is huge. It's $5 billion today. It's growing at 23%. It's going to get much larger. That's part of a customer care, business and industry that's growing at 22%, which is currently $7 billion. So you're starting to see much more attention paid to the customer experience, but also in terms of automation. Automation is a huge market. It's $20 billion. It's growing at around 23%. And businesses are realizing they just can't keep throwing human bodies at things. They've actually got to automate processes. That's part of a business process automation market that continues to grow. It's 20 billion right now annually, and it's growing at around 13%. That market is taking into account many of the issues that companies are trying to face as they realize they simply can't scale in the human element, that they really do need to digitize many processes, and some of them deep-grained in technologies, deep-grained in customer best practices, deep-grained in terms of operational processes. It's no easy task. But the net of it is that as the human element becomes a little more scarce, as the human element becomes a little less scalable, and as businesses need to continue to serve, support, and scale, technology is an enabler of that. So getting beyond things like a defense around cybersecurity, which is important, there has been this huge shift towards automation and particularly artificial intelligence to cover some of these gaps, particularly for mid-sized companies that need to compete without the infinite budgets of some of their larger competitors.
With all the changes going on, sometimes there's a lot that can get misunderstood. What would you say really stands out as maybe one thing or an issue that's most misunderstood about your industry, or maybe around your product or solution?
Well, and that gets very interesting because technology itself is really known for the shiny trinket syndrome. It's the latest methodology, it's the latest technology, it's what's flashiest, it's what markets well. And there's been an awful lot of money spent by companies who have pursued those things to try to implement them, to find out that they're still not solving problems. There's a lot of good work, a lot of great technologies out there, obviously, but the IT market continues to refresh itself. And I can go all the way back through my career and see all sorts of paradigms. And on-demand computing was huge. We now call that cloud. There's this constant marketing shift to make technology relevant, particularly as core technologies have started to erode a bit, and the new innovative technologies have taken hold: cloud, artificial intelligence, and so on. What's probably misunderstood is how these technologies can be harnessed in a practical way to solve business problems without breaking the bank, without having to require an awful lot of staff and resources and expertise. Just the right type of guidance, the right type of engineering, the right type of ongoing counsel, and the ability to attack specific problems with measurable objectives. The misunderstanding comes from kind of the shiny marketing side, and that may sound strange for a guy who's a professional in marketing, but it also gives me the advantage of being able to sort out what's real and what's hype. And having served on the professional services side, implementations, and so on, that it gives me what I think is a good perspective of being able to be genuine in presenting some of the realities versus the misconceptions to customers as they look to solve specific problems. What is good is to see a focus on businesses of getting after business problems and not so much chasing the, kind of the shiny objects. That could be budget fatigue. It simply could be just a loud, noisy, flashy market. But that particular perception of having to solve problems is something that is really working against some of the great misunderstandings that technology as a whole has had to endure.
Speaking of solving problems, as a business leader, what have you learned from COVID-19, that you might want to share that could help other business leaders?
Well, it has changed everything. I think most notably, we can talk about the technical aspects. We can talk about, people having to connect remote, working remotely, people, not coming into the office. I mean, all of that's kind of standard. But the reality is that the world is always changing. COVID is just one of the latest things, and that's triggered a lot of different changes. But what is interesting that has substantially changed is the relationship that companies have with their customers. And that exchange needs to be much friendlier, needs to be much more amiable, needs to be resolution oriented to customers who have problems, not simply dumping them in queues, waiting to be able to talk with someone, or say chatbot agents that lead you through a artificial conversation just to dump you off at a PDF URL. That's not help. The exchange with customers is very important, and some of that is key. We see, notable studies out there, where, seriously, 4 out of 5 customers will be willing to pay for an exceptional customer experience. The money is there from the customer side to help fuel these types of transformations. What is interesting is to see that half of customers will walk away from a bad customer experience. And as all business leaders know, it is far easier to keep a current customer than it is to go out and get a new one. And it's cheaper as well. So the move into transformation and the understanding that the relationship has changed in a tangible way, not simply in a convenience way, but in a fundamental way, that does require an examination of processes. It does require an examination of how business is done with customers in order to encourage and retain business from customers. And those are the biggest lessons that I've seen that have come out of COVID, beyond some of the obvious ones about connectivity and scale and remote work and so on. It's really about being able to have intimate customer exchange in a good, reliable way that doesn't frustrate the customer and doesn't cause the customer to walk away to other competitors.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's very on point and insightful. And a lot of times, we as business leaders don't think of it in the way that you phrase that. And one thing I also wanted to say to you is, before we wrap up our discussion today, I definitely don't want to end this without giving you a few minutes to tell us about the True Resolve practice at Affinity.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because it fits in line to us, not just where the trends are, but we're business people. We're not just a tech services company. Affinity has been around for 20 years. It's got deep experience with rich customer histories and large and small customers in data management, ERP implementations, full migrations, cloud technologies, and so on. The addition of True Resolve, which is our service offering around artificial intelligence and particularly conversational AI, to improve customer relationships and to include and to improve the embrace that organizations have with their customers, is a natural extension of the rich tradition and performance and reputation that Affinity has. There are a lot of business owners that do think this way. The problem is getting from A to B is really, really difficult. And if you try to navigate through an IT organization, that can be particularly frustrating because IT has to weave itself between these huge growing markets with all these different technologies to try to come up with a solution that's actually going to be workable, supportable, and so on. That's important. But quite honestly, the experience and what's required on the business side is really paramount to achieving the ultimate objective. And Affinity thinks that way. Affinity thinks very much like business people. That's what we've been doing. That's why when we look at problems, when we look at customer situations, and more importantly, when we implement solutions like our True Resolve offering, it's not about the flashy technology. It's about how the technology line is engineered into processes to better automate and better facilitate customer experience and measurable objectives that can be monitored in an ongoing basis to show not just returns, but to show lifts like increased competitiveness and a lowering of the bottom line and an increase in the top line. These are all important things that we hold dear as tenets. And it's one of the things that True Resolve around conversational artificial intelligence is just a natural extension of that has really been warmly embraced in the short time that we've released it.
Well, Joe, I'm really glad we put this discussion together today. It's been very insightful. I want to thank everyone for viewing our interview today with Joe Loveless, Vice President of Business and Market Development at Affinity Incorporated. Be sure to connect with Joe on LinkedIn or at trueresolve.com. That's TRURESOLVE.com. I'm David Balzen on behalf of CXO Informer. Have a great day.